So now let's start. Thank you very much, Ou Ning, for joining us from Hubei tonight to talk about historical utopian communities and how these communities imagined a better world in the time of crisis. Thank you very much, and I look forward to joining you at the very end of this talk.
Thanks for Jane's introduction. Yeah, as we all understood now, we are facing a huge challenge and difficulty brought by the coronavirus pandemic. The world is now going back to the localism, nationalism, and protectionism. And at the same time, we also expect kind of a status power to rescue us. And the social distancing has actually get us back to the warm, just like kind of a pre-life situation. You can see the world, but you cannot touch the world. You cannot connect with people. And the pandemic also make the economic standstill, and also liberate the deer in the tourist area of Nara in Japan, and also make place for the monkey in Thailand. And actually before the pandemic, the view in Zhejiang province already occupy a village abandoned by people. So we can say the pandemic actually attacked the achievement of the globalization and neoliberalism economic. But actually, when Margaret Thatcher kicked off this kind of neoliberalism policy in 1980, she has a slogan: "There's no alternative." But we can from a historical point of view, we can sort when every time when crisis happen, there's always some people trying to search for an alternative life. So what my research actually is based on some utopian practice from 18th century to now. And today I would like to share this topic based on my research projects, Utopian Field research projects. I would like to put it in a crisis and opportunity framework, because actually when the pandemic happened, I immediately recognized it may be an opportunity for people to practice kind of going back to small space for a decentralized and low nature friendly mutual aid community life. It should be like an opportunity. You can also say every time it was the crisis who make all the utopian practice happen. So today I'm going to talk about crisis and utopian. And to start this, I have to say my utopian research project actually was developed from B3 projects, which was start from 2010. At that time, I stayed in Beijing, and because I think when we live in the big city, we face a lot of problems like pollution, overcrowding, and also people have to struggle for their job opportunity and educational resources. So and then I decided to move to a small village in Anhui province with my family and some of my friends. I went there and to stay in the village, become the neighbor of the villagers, At the same time, we organize a lot of cultural, artistic, and educational event for the villagers. After 6 years, the project was banned by the Chinese central government, and then I moved to New York to teach at Columbia University. And this year, the Playground Macmillan is going to publish a book. Is going to publish my collected writing about Bishan projects. So when I finish this book, I start to write a new book, which mainly focus on Utopian Field. And at the beginning of 2009, I moved back to Jingzhou City in Hubei province for family reason. So I have I have a lot of time. So I start to write it, because from the past 10 years, I already make a lot of field trip. The reason I start this research project is because I want to learn more historical experience to run the Bishan projects. But now it became a book project. So I visit a lot of I did a lot of field trip in Europe, Northern America, and the Pan Pacific area, and of course in China during the past decade. And then I decided to structure my book as for, let's say, like 20 chapters, including some case from 18th and 19th century, and some case in 20th and 21st century, and the cases in 18th and 19th century is mainly based in America, like Securism, Ovanism, Fourierianism, professionalism, Ecologism, and anarchism. Because in 19th century, American actually, they're very open to the radical experiment. They create a very wider political space for those utopian. And most of this practice, utopian practice, we can call it pre-Marxism's communism. Because at that time, Marx still did not launch his communism theories, but most of this utopian and already have this practice in different corners of the United States. So, and in 20th and 21st century, we have this kibbutz movement in Israel, and also we have this new village, Atalasiki Mura movement in Japan, and also have this rural reconstruction project by Tagore in India. And Tagore had an influence on a British experiment called Dartington. And of course, in China, we have this Chinese rural reconstruction movement led by Mr. James Yang and Liang Shuming and Tao Xingzhi and Peng Yuting in Henan province. And when we came to the 1960 and 1970, in the United States, because the Vietnam War crisis, the hippies, the Back to the Land movement took place in Northern America, and also have a great influence on, let's say, New Zealand and Australia. And some hippies communes was found in the United States. And then when we came to the 1970s, we have a lot of eco-village, which I mainly visit them in New Zealand and Australia. So I'm also interested in some rural art projects, because Bishan projects is mainly art, based in art and cultural events. So I would like to learn some rural art projects in Japan, in Thailand, and to try to bring their experience for the Bishan projects. So far, I already finished about 15. So far, I already finished 10 chapters. I still have more historical site and more place to visit. I hope I can finish before 2022. But today, because this research project is quite big, including too many cases, so today I mainly introduce two cases. The first one is Brook Farm near the Boston in the United States, and then before I just introduce Brook Farm, I would like to tell you something about the Panic of 1837. This crisis, this financial crisis, actually activate a lot of utopian and communitarianism practice in the United States because a lot of the people lost their job. They would like to find a place to stay together, to find an alternative life, which was different from the mainstream life at that time, the capitalism life. And the panic of 1837 the main reason is because the President Andrew Jackson, he don't like the ban of the United States. That is the central bank of America, because he think there was too many funding, too many capital from UK, from British, and also the ban pay too much attention to New England, and the American farmer could not get the help from this ban of the United States, and then he stopped it, and then he set up a lot of a new state treasury bank, and because at that time American was in a boom to invest in the West. So the state treasury bank, without enough specie, but they issue a lot of financial paper and make the economic bubble in the West. So when the cotton export to British come to end, and the price of cottons decline, and the bank was immediately bankrupt, and so there's a lot of people lost their job, and a lot of businessmen could not transfer their financial paper to species. So a lot of companies are bankrupt, and this create a huge crisis in the society at that time. This is the cartoon was showing effect of an unemployment family. So everybody have to look to make living by themselves. And so at that time, it's not even intellectual, but not only intellectual, but also the ordinary people also trying to build up the new community to get involved in the non-governmental social reform. In a letter to Thomas, to philosophers in British, Emerson said, "We are little while here with numberless projects of social reform. Not a reading man, but has a dread of a new community in his very close pocket." And but the most successful new community was a Brook Farm. It was farmed by George and Sophia Ripley. George used to be a Unitarian minister. He was not satisfied with the capitalism disaster, and he decided to farm a new commune outside of the Boston. But at that time, there's a lot of talentless intellectual. They have a club at his home. So when he had this idea, not so many friends support him, including Amazon, Amazon, and including Margarita Fuller's. They think Ripley's plan will be not successful, but Ripley insisted to do it, and then he believed his idea to found Brook Farm will be a light over this country and this age. If not the sunrise, it will be the morning star. So he invites Emerson to join his projects, but unfortunately, Emerson is not interested. But Emerson provided a great support for him. So they moved to a countryside outside Boston, and then they take this kind of drum stock format. That means every member can donate some money as a shareholder, and then they start this communal living, and also communal living style, and also they take this collective ownership system, and they build some beautiful houses on the field. You can saw on this oil painting. From right side, they call it the hive. It's a communal dining room and meeting room for them. And this is Margaret Fuller's cottage, and this is a Elis. This is a house for Ripley, and this is a pilgrim houses. And they're going to build a big communal house here, but unfortunately, during the construction process, the building was on fire assistantly. So when they stay there, they organize a lot of a program. Their school was very famous. I think the school in Broadfarm is the pioneer of the progressive education in the United States. At the same time, they organize a lot of artistic and cultural events. Most important thing, they really want to, everybody have to work. They really want to make the role work. That means voluntary work instead of the earn work. That means work to earn money. And they also try to make no difference between the mental and manual work. And leisure is a very important idea for them. And of course, the communal living, the collective ownership, that is why later the historian called Brook Farm as a pre-Marxism communism. So and also the women and men who live in the Brook Farm, they take the gender equality as a very important idea. For example, sometimes women also work in the field, and in the winter, in the cold winter, the men also doing some washing job in the kitchen. So it makes different from women and men. And because Ripley is a minister, so he believed the universal brotherhood in the community. At that time, the idea of mutual aid is not, it's not come out, but Ripley promote this universal brotherhood. Actually, this is a similar idea with the mutual aid idea. And also in 1844, they become a flanked, which influenced by Charles Fourier, because in the United States, there's two guys. One is Urban Brisbane. Another guy is the founder of the New York Tribune, Horace Greeley. These two, Albert Brisbane introduced Fourierism to the United States, and because he published a lot of articles on New York Tribune, so it have a great influence on those workers who lost their job. And then those workers in New Jersey, they decided to set up Fourierism flankers in New Jersey. That is called North American flankers. And because Brook Farm have a lot of New England intellectual, so Brisbane and Grizzly want to get the Blues Band involved in the Fourierism movement, and finally Brook Farm become another flankers, and then they can get funding from the two guys, and then they do a lot of publication, and they publish this newspaper magazine, the Flankers and Harbingers. But unfortunately, when they trying to do the fundraising, trying to build trying to build a huge communal house, the Flans study in Brook Farm, they invest about $10,000 US. That is very much in 19th century, but unfortunately, the building was on fire, and that make the farm have a huge debt. So immediately the community was closed, and then Lipray had to find a job at the New York Tribune, and that is the story of Brook Farm. In 2019, I visited the historical site. It's just old house. It's a print shop. Stay there. It's almost it's not like Sacred Village in Prison Hill or in New Lebanon. The second village already become a tourism site, but Brook Farm historical site still nobody come. It's a very pity, but I found there's a small group in Boston in trying to do something for it. It's so pity, but it's a heritage for the utopian, as a very important utopian heritage. Brook Farm, should be innovated to a new site to engage more people to visit. But unfortunately, it did not happen so far. And the second case I would like to talk about it is about the Japanese utopian, and also because in the first world work make a huge social crisis in Japan, because after the Meiji reform, Japanese government was full of confidence because they won in the Sino-Japanese War, and later they also won in the Russia-Japanese War. So they really want to keep off more work to grab more resources from different countries. So in 1914, the Japan troops attacked the German colonies of Qingdao, and then through this he participated in the First World War. And there's a group of intellectuals. They mainly come from the upper-class family, and they study in the noble school in Japan, but they are not satisfied with the reality. They often criticize the Japanese militarism. They want Japanese society to be a peace society. Then they start to publish a literature magazine called White Birds and introduce the humanitarianism and cosmopolitanism idea to Japan. And at the same time, they introduce a lot of European modern art to Japan. So in this group, the leader is the Seniju Musenokoji. He found the literature magazine and become the leader of the literature group. But he had this very strong idea because he was influenced by Tolstoy's and also the Peter Kruskim's anarchism. He wanted to start a new life in the countryside of Japan, and then he found a land in Takaju, and decided to move there with his friend. In 1918, he held this farewell party in Abiko because most of these White Birds members live in Abiko. It's about 50 kilometers from Tokyo. And then they moved there and set up a new village there in Takaju. And so they set up a new system. So it's quite similar to Brook Farm. They have two kind of membership. One is on-site member. On-site member have to move to the new village and stay there, live there. They have to donate all their property as a collective wealth, and to realize the communal living. And the second membership is the off-site membership. People who live in Tokyo, live in Osaka, live in different cities, they can donate money to support this experiment. And sometimes they can visit the village, but they don't need to stay in the village. They don't need to put all their property and money on the village. And of course, because the member of New Village was influenced by Tolstoy's pan-laborism. So everybody have to work together, and they live together, work together, and eat together. They every month they at the same time they also have some money for their personal use. But this is a kind of life at the beginning it's quite difficult because the land quality there was not so productive. So the agricultural production is not that good. So they have to ask the support from the off-site member support their money. But Senitru he invests a lot of times and money in this project, and he published a lot of a book. All the income of the book he donate to the new village projects. He also sold his property in Abico. He sold his house in Abico and invest the new money to the new village. And unfortunately, the Tagueyo new village was flooded because the local government want to build a reservoir. So the village was flooded by the water, and then they have to find a new site near Tokyo. In 1939, they find a new land in Monoyama, which is very close, which in the metropolitan area of Tokyo, and then start the second new village. Of course, because they, most of them are, I mean, the main funder of the new village are writer, intellectuals, so they have produce a lot of publication and organize a lot of artistic and cultural events. They even have this theater projects and sometimes performance in Tokyo and other cities. So when I visit there in 2019, there's still some old member living there. It's quite a long-lived utopian in Japan. It's more than 100 years. This is the village in Monoyama. The Japanese say it was a sentence by the founder that means everybody who entering this game should be respected the life of their own and others. So when we go inside this gate, and then I can find they're still doing the farming, and they grow these tea trees, and also have a museum there. So in 2018, they have this 100 anniversary event in the village. And as another member of the White Birch group, Mr. Alusima Takio, he also have a very radical action. In 1921, he decided to give up his wealth and hand his family as a curator farm in Hokkaido over to his tenants, who transfer it into a cooperative farm in that years. Because he also come from very up-class family. So this action actually, I would like to call it as class suicide. It's not my idea. It's idea of Apollo Fridays, because that means he cut off his relationship with his class and start a new life, and give up all his wealth. This is very radical at that time, actually. But when we're looking at the history of Chinese revolutionary, there are also a lot of middle-class kids. They left their family and joined the community party's revolution. And except those new village movement at that time, there are also some Japanese intellectual. They started semi-agricultural life in Chitose village, which is now already part of the urban Tokyo. Today, the semi-agricultural life is quite popular in Japan. The young Japanese, they call this half agriculture and half X. That means if you go back to the countryside and at the same time you have a freelance job as a writer, you can call your lifestyle as half agriculture, half writing. actually originally come from this semi-agricultural life in Meiji era, which killed off by some Japanese writers like Tokutomi Ruka. He wrote a wonderful book about his rural life in the beginning of 20th century. Also, there's some like Ito Tokiri. He also have a personal practice, a new farm, also in the same village. But his interest is more in philosophy, the agricultural philosophy. So he based on 18th century utopian philosopher Anton Shokei, and developed his own Buddhism agricultural philosophy, which like this mentor he drew it. It's very Japanese, very Asian philosophy, agriculture philosophy. It also become part of the agrarianism, Japanese agrarianism. So today, a lot of researchers trying to compare his ideology with the Chinese rural reconstructionist Liang Shuming. It is very interesting. These two intellectuals in Asia, they almost at the same time to start a same practice in rural Japan and rural China. And almost at the same generation, this is Kawa Sensiro. He's a radical anarchist. He also stay in the village, the same village, and with some of his followers, and he produced a lot of anarchism publication. But his ideas mainly focus on the class struggle. It's quite different from those people. Of course, the quite famous Japanese famous poet Kenji Miyazawa. He lived in the eastern Noro area of Japan, which was the agriculture area in Japan. He taught at the agriculture school, and also formed this Lasur Old Man Association, and trying to help the farmers to organize their production, and also try to organize their cultural life. He wrote a small book about the art of a farmer, and he insisted the farmers should invent their own art projects. So he died too early. Otherwise, he became very active in the Japanese agrarianism movement. So when we came to the 20th century, in Japan, there was a lot of disaster. The first one was the Kendo Great earthquake in 1923. And after that, the 1929 Great Depression, and followed the depression, it was the Showa food crisis in 1930. Because the Japanese government want to, they want to cope with this crisis, and the final decision was to keep off the war, the Pacific War, to join in the Second World War. That was a not so good example for the people to cope with the crisis. It finally became a war, become the war. So I found some photos during the Showa's food crisis. At that time, because the 1929 Great Depressions, the American markets was totally, normally the Japanese shoe production will export to American, but after the depression, there's no market for them. So the agricultural products could not sell off. And also the rice price declined. And the farmer could not make living through agricultural production. At the same time, in the eastern, northern eastern area, the agricultural area in Japan, this very terrible snow disaster in 1930. So there was terrible shortage of food. The children, totally in Japan, in that years, there's 200,000 children that have no food to eat. So this photo shows the children have to eat the radish in northeastern area. And also because the parents, they could not offer food for their children, they have to sell their daughters to be a geisha. So to cope with this, this crisis, the food crisis, the Japanese intellectual, especially those agrarianism intellectual, they publish book, and they propose a lot of idea to cope with this projects, and all their idea, their proposal was absorbed by the militarism government, and made it together with Pan-Asianism, and finally become the greater East Asian co-prosperity sphere. It's a kind of ideology of war. So when I do some reading about this, I often think about the One Belt, One Road projects now in China. It's quite similar to this policy before the Second World War in Japan. So we can find the non-government intellectual, they also have a lot of action to cope with this food crisis and agricultural crisis. At the same time, the Japanese government also have make a lot of policy to cope with this crisis. The main policies of Japanese government is conform the countryside in Japanese, conform the population and the property ownership in the whole countryside of Japan. And actually, this kind of a movement was especially prepared for the war. There's another policy is to try to emigrate the Japanese people to outside of Japan, including this Manchuria in China. So the idea was proposed by a Japanese agrarians intellectual and become an official policy. And then the government commissioned an architect, Yoshihito Yoshikazu, who designed the Tokyo Imperial University campus. And they designed this design a plan for this immigration village in Manchuria. When we saw this design, it's really utopian. It looked very utopian. It's really like the building in New Harmony by Robert Owen. But but since in 1945, the Japanese surrendered, the war ended. So this project was not realized, but it's looked very, very huge and very, very utopian. So I can call this emigrate population to oversee. It's a kind of a utopian idea for the Japanese government. Okay, except the Japanese government, this immigration projects in China, in Manchuria, some non-government group also, after the Showa food crisis, they also decided to move outside of Japan. Some of them moved to Brazil, because Brazil, after the when the international society stopped the chain of slavery, and Brazil need a lot of labor, and they engaged Japan and China to move people there, but only China refused, but Japanese government engaged people to move. And there's one guy called Isumu Zuber. He moved to Brazil in 1930, which the food crisis just happened. And after 5 years, he found a socialist farm in Brazil. At the very beginning in Fumasa, and then moved to another small village. Very interesting. Most of them are Christian people. So the historian now call the the Zuba farm as a Christian socialist farm, and during the Second World War, because the Japanese government is was grouped together with Italy, and so the Brazil stopped the relationship with the Japan. So the farm had a very hard years at that times. They just like children who was abandoned by the mother. So they have to develop a lot of art projects to how to say it, for survival, especially spiritual survival. So they develop very interesting the ballet dance, and also make a lot of music and art projects. So far, this farm still exists in Brazil. It is also almost 90 years. It's the new village and in this farm in Brazil, there's two long-lived utopian and in Japan. I mean, farmed by Japanese. So because we don't have too much time, so just to talking of these two cases. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ou Ning. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me here. We're running a bit late, so I'm going to do this part quick. We have already received some feedback and questions from audience across different platforms. So my question to Ou Ning will probably synthesize some of your feedback and questions. So Ou Ning, thank you very much for the presentation. Although you only talked about 2 projects in detail, but the research seems to be very extensive and across different time and geography. And also it was really great to hear your kind of analysis in connecting these utopia projects. Also, you think of they as a result, or at least partially a response to the crisis at that given historical moment, a response to the failure of the social system. But in the case of Japan, I do see you kind of also have a part that thinking it could be read as a cautionary tale where some of the strategies was later appropriated by the government as and how they legitimized it to their imperial expansion. But also one thing I do realize, and also following your thought, was most of these utopia projects were initiated and led by elites, or what you call the intellectual sort of class, intellectual class. And also you did mention that they come from upper class, and there's this really nice idea that you brought forward of the class suicide. And I think one of the audience also did asking question that these seems like you can argue that these experiments can also be read as escapist, not dissimilar to some young Ivy League students throwing away their expensive college degrees and to run organic farms in Oregon, particularly from this question. And then thinking about what has been going on currently around the world, not only COVID, but also particularly in the United States of, all these struggles, very intense and visceral struggles on a very, very individual level. How do you see, these sort of practice of utopia, these historical examples, and sort of the idea of restate the importance of at least practice to imagine the utopia and the way of thinking about them could inform our current situation?
Yes. So when I talk about this historical, the history of the utopian, it not mean we need to go back to the past, because the contemporary conditions totally change. So I think the meaning of my research is trying to provide some historical experience for contemporary experiment. But you don't need to follow. We don't need to go back. Return to the past is impossible. So we still need to learn from the historical experience, but should invent a new form to cope with the contemporary condition. Just like, yes, maybe today some student, maybe they don't have resources to start organic farm, but they, as I can see recently, I saw a lot of group in New York or in Seattle. Let's say I just read a coverage by New Yorker. There's a lot of mutual aid group happen, like there's invisible hands deliverers in Harlem. They have to send send food to the elderly and take care of them. And when we saw this practice during the pandemic, we can understood, wow, so the mutual aid idea actually is quite old. It's not new, but it can be practiced today and in a new way. So with the internet, people ask for help on Facebook, and then the invisible hand and then send something over there. So this is what I think is we need to invent something new based on the old idea.
While we were checking in for this event, you also mentioned that you suspect or you speculate there will be some new thinking or try or experiment after the COVID crisis, after we got to the other side. And you also mentioned that you think that these try or these new experiments, if any, would be focusing on more the pragmatic side of things. Yeah. I was interested in that idea of how do you define this practical or pragmatic aspect of these possible models that you having in mind. Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yes, let's take B-Sun projects as an example. So at the first slide of my presentation, you can see some villages. At the beginning of the epidemic happened in Wuhan, some villages, they blocked their road, they blocked the entrance to the village, and they even use their old weapon, the cold weapon, to guide this entrance. That means it seems people are trying to go back to the localism, but it's impossible. But it's impossible to become a localism today. Let's say when I live in B-Sun, I found actually the local villagers, they don't eat the rice they grow. All the rice they have to buy from the market. It's kind of they eat Thailand, the rice of Thailand, rice from eastern province in China. So somebody think if a village today, when the pandemic happened, a village cut off the law and brought the law, and they will become a closed society, it will be safe because they have food storage. That is impossible because even a small village now is connected with the global market. So what we should do today, actually, if we can move to a small place, a small village, we should not to follow those traditional localism. We should welcome more and more people come back to join in this projects. And maybe this village was not their hometown, but maybe they are foreigner, but they can be a new homecomer, and through this, different people with different experience go to a small village, and then they trying to live in a multiple idea, a different idea, and then to found this, I call it new nativeness, which was different from the traditional local protectionism.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That is, yeah.
Oh, sorry, if you have anything more to say.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I have my last question here, something that I would love your feedback. And after that, I would open one or two more questions from the Q&A, and also some I feel very sort of, I echo with these questions. So I will build into a little bit of my own thinking into it. But since you talked a lot about ruralism, and also the countryside, and how that is a very important thing, Liam thought in your ideas of perceiving utopia and understanding these historical examples. And some people might know, and I'm sure you are aware, that there is this big exhibition currently on view, or not on view because the museum is closed, at the Guggenheim. It's a very sort of large-scale research done by Ram Koolhaas. And we also know that Ram was an advocate for urbanism and cosmopolitanism, where he wrote the book Delirious New York. But now he seems to have a return of this idea of the countryside and the ruralism, where he sees this is the future, or should be the future of the world. When I was thinking about the exhibition, I immediately thought about your project, also the Bishan commune, etc., and a lot of things that you are thinking and researching for years. So I'm curious of your feedback on the Countryside Show, and also the methodology that Ram Koolhaas has been using to, take on this particular topic.
Yeah, this is I remember in 2008, I already met Ram to discuss the idea of so-called ruralism, because at that time I was prepared for the 2009 Shenzhen Hong Kong Bi-City Biennale of Urbanism and Architecture, and at that year I invite him to host a marathon conversation with Hans Roberts, and the topic also including the countryside. So I believe he have developed this interest for many years, and especially in Guggenheim will deepen the public interest on the countryside topic worldwide, especially during the pandemic. I used to plan to visit the exhibition, but now at that time it already became a pandemic. I could not go, but I often in the same conference with AMO people, when they share this idea, the idea of the exhibition. So I understood actually the exhibition project saw a different rural landscape, the radical change of rural landscape under the neoliberalism economic, and at the same time he saw the non-urban area, the land resources, the potential of the non-urban land resources, and also he the exhibition project also showed the possibility for agriculture, which brought by some new biotechnology and AI technology. And through the exhibition, I can feel an utopian, I can feel a European architect, his ambition to create a new world, to open up a new world. But it's quite a little bit pity that the whole exhibition have without any sense of crisis of the algorithm, which in Asia regions, which Asian people struggling, trying to maintain for many years. Because even today in China now, in the during the pandemic, we're still worried about the full research, reverse research topic today. But I understood the experience is totally from a point of view of utopian architect. He really want to open a non-urban new world. And also the very strong image for me that the exhibition show farmers who stay at home watching his screen to monitor the farming by the robot, right? So this is a very strong image. But if farmer working like that, and the whole agricultural population will decline, and the agricultural community will die out. But you know, in the United States, in the political ecology, during the 1929 to COVID, the Great Depression, the New Deal policy support agriculture a lot with the public funding. Because at that time, the industrial agriculture is not that big, not start yet. This is still a huge agricultural population in the United States. It become very important sources for vote. So it very become, but today we need to we need to maintain and keep up agricultural, farmer and rural community. It's not because we need to keep up political power for votes. It also not only for the diversity lifestyle of human being, but because every nation state, they could not cut off the relationship with the agriculture, farmer, and countryside. So I think we still need to input more human resources in agriculture. It's, if you only depend on new technology, that will become, the community, the rural community will die out, and the population will become smaller and smaller.
Okay, thank you. This is really nice to kind of combing through all the different strings of thoughts. I do want to kind of pick out a few questions from the audience and trying to put them, synthesize them. I think, as you pointed out, perhaps very politely, that Ram Koolhaas's research is from a very European sort of architect utopia point of view, and the exhibition and the research, the presentation of the research did receive quite a bit of a criticism over the month, and also just a very short span of its presentation. I think people mostly were struggling in trying to understand the very complex political struggle of the land, particularly also real concrete struggles that we're having today when it comes to identity, heritage, and gender. So I look at the questions and people asking, what do you think about the role of women in these communes and the Utopia project, for one example? On the other hand, also, how do you feel about the land had been appropriated in the, the genocide of Aboriginal people? in the case of the Brook Farm. When I was looking at these issues, I also thought about science fictions where the imagination seems to be more radical, particularly in Frederick Jameson's book, Archaeologies of the Future, The Desire, called Utopia and Other Science Fictions. He gave examples of many writers and stories where a radical break up with the current system becomes possible, where gender is more fluid, where class and identity struggle can be completely thought in a different way. So I guess this would be sort of the last big question for you to give us some insight and also your read.
Yes, thank you. This is a so good question. I believe during my research on the 19th century utopian, I found almost every community can be called as the pioneer of the feminism, because women have very equality in the community. They especially Oneida in upstate New York in 19th century, they practice this free love, complex marriage, and a lot of this in their community. And marriage and private ownership, it's always was regarded as the reason of a bad word, because if you have family, you have to fight for your family interests, and women in a traditional marriage society is always is not important. Their role is always as a wife, right? But in those 19th century utopian, and they really put women in a very important position. They not only share the same resources of the community, but at the same time, sometimes the community promote women as a symbol of the gender equality. Like Oneida, they often make some postcard to promote how women they live so well in their community. They have very good position. They share everything with the men, and this is many example, because at that time most of the intellectual they also have this awareness about women's right. It's more than some pioneer of the feminism in the United States. For the science fiction, I think there's a very interesting question. Today, what I told utopian is it's not mean nowhere. It means somewhere. It's all this intentional community. They are real people in a real place doing some alternative things. But most of the science fiction is about dystopia, actually. Dystopia.
Dystopia, you mean dystopia? Or?
Yeah, dystopia, yeah. Dystopia, yeah. Including William Gibson's New Romancer, and also the Robinson's The Three Novel about March. It's totally it's criticize the reality, the political problem actually. And in China, the science fiction writer Liu Cixin, very surprised when I read his The Three Birdies Problem, the volume 1 in 2008. I found he wrote a very traditional Chinese utopian in this book. The utopian group called pastoral China in a big city and found by biologists, and they use everything, the rubbish of the city, and trying to go back to the nature. So that was the only one example, traditional utopian idea in Chinese science fiction. And there's another very important Chinese science fiction writer, Han Song. I think he is a small dystopia writers. His Subway is telling a very terrible story about a very terrible society. So, but like the AI technology in Neuromancer by William Gibson already legalized it today. I remember during the epidemic, there's a lot of the police used the drone flying over the street or over the village to catch those people who did not wear the mask, and they ask them and push them back home for quality. So, and also some police with this facial recognition helmet to searching the fever. So the dystopian spectacle in science fiction or in cyberpunk fiction already become a reality.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think I don't. I wish this conversation could go on much further. I unfortunately think that we need to bring this event to a close. Ou Ning, let me just say that your discussion was fascinating. Thank you so much for giving us a peek into your research, which is obviously very, very rich and deep. We look forward to your book. We look forward to more discussions like this. They are obviously very timely. I think a lot of people are thinking very hard about how to respond, what is a better way, what is a better world, and how we can take this opportunity of crisis to enact that in both small and large ways. Xiaoyu, thank you very much for synthesizing a wide range of questions in a masterful fashion. I really appreciate it, and it is too bad that I never got to see the Guggenheim's exhibition on the countryside, but I assume we will be able to see it in some form in the future. And I look forward to seeing you in Brooklyn, even though we're not very far apart, but seeing you physically when we're allowed. So thank you very, very much, everybody, and the audience for participating from all over the world. And please keep your questions coming. You can send them to Asia Art Archive or to Ou Ning and Xiaoyu directly, and we will keep this conversation alive. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.